He ended his entire family over a cam girl. Grant Amato was born on May 20th of 1989 and lived with his parents in Orlando, Florida. From the outside looking in, they looked like the ideal happy family. Growing up, he was really close with his brother Cody, and they even attended nursing school together. Cody was able to graduate from nursing school, and for Grant, he did finish his nursing requirements, but he failed from his anesthesiology school, but he was still able to land a nursing job, but it didn't last long. Grant was fired from that nursing job because he was caught stealing and improperly administering medication. The company that Grant was working for got him arrested, but somehow the charges were dropped. Since Grant didn't have a job, he would just stay in his bedroom at his parents' house and he would just play video games and live stream. Grant wanted to become popular on Twitch and he really thought this was his way of making money. When he wasn't gaming or live streaming, he would be on adult websites. That's when Grant met a Bulgarian cam girl named Sylvie and he became infatuated with her. Sylvie was gorgeous, she had long dark hair, a beautiful figure, and Grant was in love and obsessed with her. In order for Grant to watch Sylvie, he would buy 5,000 tokens at a time, which would be around $600. Her shows would cost 90 tokens per minute, and Grant would end up spending up to $2,500. At this point, Grant was desperate to keep Sylvie in his life and would do anything to keep watching her. Aside from the tokens, Grant would also send her lingerie and toys that she could use during her shows. Since Grant didn't have a job, he needed money in order to pay to see Sylvie, so he stole his father's and his brother Cody's credit card and maxed it out. When these transactions were first discovered, he tried to tell them that he needed the extra money to promote himself on Twitch, but they already knew he was lying and he wasn't going to stop. Grant had taken about $200,000 in a span of months. The tension between Grant and his father increased because all of his retirement money went to a girl that his son had never even met. After this argument, Grant left the home and went to go stay with his aunt, and then she noticed that money was missing from her account. Grant's parents begged her not to press charges because they didn't want him to get in any kind of trouble. One day, the family took Grant to a rehab facility, and after a couple of weeks, he was able to return home, but there was going to be strict rules for him. These requirements were that he had to get a job, he couldn't be online at night, couldn't have a cell phone, wasn't able to contact Sylvie, and needed to go to therapy. But these rules meant nothing to Grant because he was able to trick his mother into giving her phone to him so that he could still contact Sylvie. Once Grant's father found out about this, he grabbed him by the shirt, told him to get out, pack his things because he was no longer welcome. On January 24th of 2019, Grant was supposed to be gathering his things to move out, but he came up with another plan. While his mother was working on the computer, he walked up behind her and shot her in the head. Once his father came home, he walked into the kitchen and shot him twice in the head. The last person he needed to get rid of was Cody, so he waited until he was done with his nursing shift. He walked inside of the home and he shot him in the head. Grant then attempted to stage the scene to make it seem like Cody was the one who did this to his parents and then himself. The next day, when Cody failed to show up to work, his coworkers were worried, so they contacted police. Once police arrived at the home, they weren't able to get an answer from knocking on the door, so they just went inside and they were met with a gruesome scene. Police were able to track down Grant and took him in for questioning. Authorities found several photos on Grant's computers of credit cards that belonged to his parents, Cody, and other family members. Grant was questioned and interviewed, and when he was shown photos of his dead family, he just said he didn't have anything to do with it. Towards the end of the long interrogation, Grant still wouldn't come clean, so he was arrested on 3 counts of first-degree murder. July 31st of 2019, Grant was found guilty on all 3 counts and he was given a life sentence for each.
Just hours into the new year, he would massacre 3 women. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the Hordern shooting case. Hordern is a beautiful, cosy little village nearby Peterlee in County Durham. And that is where couple Michael Atherton and Susan McGoldrick were living. In the late hours of New Year's Eve 2011, Michael, who was working as a taxi driver, had been out for a couple of drinks, returning back home at around about 10:30 p.m. Susan McGoldrick, his partner, had also been out that night, but she'd been out separately. She had been with her sister Alison, her niece Tanya, and many others having a fun-filled night, ready to bring in the new year. Michael was very open to Susan that he did not like Alison. Alison was a very strong woman who wasn't afraid to put Michael in his place. Over the course of their relationship, Michael was abusive and volatile towards Susan. She would go to the hospital at least 17 times to treat injuries that he had inflicted on her. On one occasion, in a rage, he actually smashed a clock over her head. Whenever Susan needed help or support, Alison was always there with a click of a finger, and Michael hated this. On the night of New Year's Eve 2011, Michael had warned Susan to keep Alison out of his sight or, quote, there would be trouble. Hours later, towards the end of their night, Susan, Alison, Tanya, and a couple of their other friends would all go back to Susan's house, where they didn't realise that Michael hadn't left yet, and upon seeing them all, this infuriated him. He got up and stormed out of the house, and the ladies almost took a sigh of relief because finally they believed he was going away, but he wasn't. Michael stormed out of his car, where he retrieved a fully loaded gun. That was one of 6 that he owned. He then marched back inside of the house and began to open fire. Some people managed to escape from an upstairs window. However, 47-year-old Susan, 44-year-old Alison, and 24-year-old Tanya would all be shot to death. After the murders, Michael Atherton would turn the gun on himself too. Michael actually owned all of these guns completely legally. He had a license for them because he would go rabbit hunting, and despite his history with domestic abuse, he was allowed to keep them. In 2009, they were actually seized from him for some time after Michael's family reported that he had been making threats to take his own life. However, all of the guns were eventually returned, and 3 years later, he would massacre 3 women with them. Since the shooting, the family of Susan have been campaigning for a change in gun laws, some which Durham Constabulary have taken on board. This is especially Alison's son Bobby, who to this day is still advocating for changes.
These siblings had 6 children together. Sarah Barras and Brandon Matchin were from the UK, and they're half siblings, and they both share the same mother. Both of them experienced severe neglect, and they spent a lot of time in the foster care system, and this is something that would leave long-lasting trauma for the both of them. The two were separated as children, but would later reconnect once they were in their late teens. Once they reunited, they bonded over the trauma that they shared, and they became really close. But over time, their relationship turned romantic. Sarah eventually became pregnant with a baby boy and named him Blake, and she told everyone that the father wasn't involved. Blake was diagnosed with ADHD along with speech and language difficulties. Sarah later gave birth to another boy and named him Tristan, and he would also deal with the same challenges. Sarah would go on to have 4 more children, and several of them would have developmental and speech difficulties. Despite everything, Sarah seemed like a caring mother. She always made sure that her children were getting the support they needed for their special needs. Sarah, Brandon, and their 6 children lived together in a small 3-bedroom house. But in 2018, authorities started going to the home more frequently once Tristan and Blake started showing concerning behavior at their school. Staff noted that Tristan and Blake would touch themselves as well as others inappropriately, so they reported this to CPS. Social workers questioned Sarah on who the father was of these children, and Sarah admitted that all of these children had the same father, but she didn't want to reveal who the father was. Sarah was terrified that her children would be removed from the home and placed into the foster care system like she was. On May 24th of 2019, police received multiple calls from people asking them to check on Sarah's children inside of her home. About 15 police vehicles arrived to the home, and once they went inside, they were met with a horrific scene. Once officers went inside of the home, they found 14-year-old Blake and 13-year-old Tristan unresponsive with plastic bags over their heads. A 3rd child was found soaking wet after an attempted drowning, and the 3 other children ages 10, 3, and 7 months old were found alive. All of Sarah's children were rushed to the hospital, and doctors discovered that they all had high amounts of ADHD medication in their system. As investigators were looking into Sarah, they looked at her search history, and it included strangulation and drowning. Police also discovered that Brandon, Sarah's half-brother, was the biological father of those 6 children. Authorities believe that the couple targeted those children because they didn't want their secret relationship to be revealed, and also Sarah was terrified that these children would be placed into the foster system. Sarah and Brandon were arrested, found guilty, and sentenced to 35 years to life in prison. The family home was later demolished, turned into a memorial garden, and the surviving children were placed into foster care.
So this Amish mom decides to unalive her husband and 4-year-old son, all because she thinks God told her to. Yeah, that is a sentence I never thought I'd say in my life. Like, when you think of the Amish life, you think of horses, buggies, homemade bread. Not this, but here we are. So her name is Ruth Miller. She's 40 years old, living in a quiet Amish community in Ohio. And she's married to this guy named Marcus. They've got 4 kids together, and by all accounts, they are the epitome of your average Amish family. And on Ruth's 40th birthday, Marcus decides to take the entire family on a trip to Atwood Lake, which is something very unusual for an Amish family. Even the neighbors were like, that's weird. But hey, maybe because it was her birthday, he wanted to do something special. But on the very first night of that trip, things get really, really weird. Instead of enjoying her birthday, Ruth decides she's going to use this trip as a way to test her faith with God. She starts saying that God is speaking directly through her and that they need to prove themselves worthy. Now, Marcus, being the devoted Amish man he is, doesn't really question it. If anything, he goes along with it. So in the middle of the night at around 1 in the morning, they all walk down to the dock at Atwood Lake. And they decide they're going to walk on water, just like Jesus did in the Bible. And of course they fail, so they try again, and they actually start walking on water. No, I'm just kidding. Can you imagine though? Now here's the thing though, this wasn't the first time Ruth believed God was testing them. For weeks, she had been telling Marcus about these so-called trials of faith that they were supposed to complete. Some of them were simple, like swimming exercises, but then the others were just flat out bizarre. Like, she said God wanted her to be swallowed by a fish, like Jonah. I already know that sounds insane, but to her it was just about proving her worthiness, showing they were very devoted to God. But anyways, when the walking on water thing fails, Marcus actually gets very disappointed in himself. He honestly believed it was because he didn't have enough faith, and I'm not joking, that's what he said. So he tells Ruth, hey, don't worry babe, I'll prove myself another way. So his new plan to prove to God that he's worthy is to swim as far as he can until he reaches a sandbar. But halfway out, Marcus starts thrashing around in the water and he drowns. And Ruth is standing there on the dock just watching her husband drown. And instead of, I don't know, calling for help, she decides to go back to the RV and tells the kids, hey, pray for your father, God will save him. And this is where the story takes its darkest turn. Because in Ruth's mind, Marcus drowning wasn't the end of it. She says God also wants her 4-year-old son Vincent as an offering to him. And with zero hesitation, she grabs her little boy, loads him onto the golf cart, and brings him all the way down to the dock. I don't even know how to say this. She then picks him up, throws him in the water, and sadly he drowns as well. Then she drives back to the RV, gathers her 3 other kids, and tells them to pray because their father and brother have gone to heaven, which is freaking insane. Like, imagine your parent casually saying that. She then loads them into the same golf cart and speeds straight towards the water, but then she loses control of the wheel and crashes straight into a stone barrier. The cart flips into the water, and by some miracle all 3 kids manage to escape before it completely sank. Meanwhile, Ruth is still in the water, and then a witness rushes over and tries to help her out. But instead of grabbing their hand, Ruth just says, no, just pray for me. But eventually someone calls the cops, and they're like, this woman tried to drive her kids straight into a lake. And so the cops rush over and they're trying to get Ruth out of the water, but she's still refusing. But we all know cops don't listen, so when they eventually get her out, she tries to run for it and hide in a bush. But obviously police catch and arrest her, and that's when they found out about the husband and 4-year-old son. A rescue team of divers immediately jump into the water, but by that point it was already too late for them. I honestly feel so bad for the 3 other kids because Vincent was actually the baby of the family, and they were naturally already so protective of him. They told investigators they just did what their mom said because naturally that's what they were raised to do. As of right now, Ruth hasn't been officially charged because right now she is in a mental facility. And a lot of people are saying that her actions are the result of spiritual delusions, not malicious intent. But what do you think? Should she face life in prison, or does she belong in treatment?
She lured a man to a love hotel where she would tie him up and then chop off his head. She then took this man's dismembered head home to her parents, who thought that it was amazing. Honestly, this is one of the most craziest cases. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Hitoshi Ura. Runa Tamura from the outside appeared to be a very shy, quiet girl. She was very reserved and would spend a lot of time at home with her parents, Hiroko and Osamu. Runa struggled struggled quite heavily in school. She would drop out when she was only 15 years old, and she told her father, Osamu, who was a psychiatrist, that she couldn't concentrate because all of the words on the pages would get off the page and dance, and she would get dizzy when she tried to focus. Despite the very timid outward appearance, on the inside the walls of her own home, Runa was completely different. If anything, she was the dominant one. She treated both of her parents horribly. They had raised her never hearing the word no. She always got what she wanted. What she said went. And she was just a brat, and not even the good kind. Hiroko and Osamu were like Runa's slaves. Osamu was like her personal chauffeur driver. Even if he was busy doing something, if she wanted to lift somewhere, he had to stop whatever he was doing to get up and drive her wherever she wanted to go. Their house was completely cluttered with all of Runa's things, and so Osamu was actually forced to work from an internet cafe because she refused to get rid of stuff and he had nowhere to work. If the father and daughter got into an argument or Osamu had upset Runa for whatever reason, she would kick him out of the house, and so it wasn't uncommon for Osamu to sleep in his car. Hiroko was very submissive to her daughter as well. She had to refer to Runa as young lady and speak to her in a polite, proper manner at all times, as if she was like a member of staff or something. Runa would actually force her own mother to sign a contract stating that she was Runa's slave. And Hiroko did it. She kept on giving Runa her own way, jumping to her beck and call. If Runa said jump, Hiroko said how high. In May 2023, 29-year-old Runa was attending a closing party within a club in the red light district of Sapporo City, Japan. While here, she would meet for the first time 62-year-old Hitoshi Ura, and the two really seemed to hit it off. They spent all night long dancing together, they were chatting, they were laughing, and they even started hugging and kissing. That night, the two would check into what they called a love hotel and spent the entire night being intimate. One of the final times that they were intimate, Hitoshi did not use protection like he promised Runa that he had. When she realised what he had done, she felt disgusted, violated, used and betrayed, and above everything, she felt ferocious anger. She would detail in her daily diary exactly what had happened, and also wrote that she was going to deal with it. She was going to get revenge. On the 1st of July 2023, Runa arranged with Hitoshi to meet up at a love hotel. CCTV would capture both of them walking in, but only Runa walking out hours later, clutching a black suitcase. Once the two got inside of their room, Runa would reveal that she was wearing a very tight-fitting black dominatrix-style outfit. She then lured Hiroshi into the bathroom of their room. She sat him down somewhere, blindfolded him, put his hands behind his back and restrained him with handcuffs. Runa then set up a video recorder and focused it on Hiroshi. She was about to film the entire thing. She would creep up behind him and told him, quote, "The thing you need to reflect on most is breaking your promise to me." After whispering this to Hiroshi, she then plunged a knife into his neck. Runa would go on to repeatedly stab Hiroshi over and over until she killed him. Once he was dead, using a saw, she would then decapitate him and partially dismember him. After all of this, she would get herself cleaned up and then left Hiroshi's body there for the cleaner to find the next day. When the cleaner checked into the room, ready to go in and clean it because the people who were in the room should have already left, she would make her way to the bathroom where she would discover the blood-soaked, traumatizing scene. Just imagine that for a second, opening up a door to reveal a blood-soaked room and lay on the floor is a dismembered, headless corpse. Police were immediately contacted, and quite quickly, thanks to CCTV alongside some other things, they were able to zone in as Ruma Taruna being their number one suspect. Officers arrived at the family home around about 3 weeks later, and in the family's shared bathroom, they would discover the decapitated head of Hiroshi. And the condition that they found it in is absolutely barbaric. His skin had been sliced off with razor blades and his eyes had been gouged out, both of which were done by Runa. After committing the murder inside of the Love Hotel, she then walked out of the hotel and jumped straight into her dad's car, who had actually been sat outside God knows how long waiting for her. When they arrived home, Runa presented Hiroshi's head to her mother Hiroko, who said, "Wow, that's amazing." And disgustingly, Hiroko would actually record Runa as she mutilated Hiroshi's head. Runa, Hiroko and Osamu were all arrested in connection with the murder. Both of the parents would go to trial for basically aiding and abetting, and they would both receive suspended sentences. They were both in their 60s at this point. During their trials, we would learn that Osamu was actually the one who went out and bought some of the murder kit, including the black suitcase, a mask and the sword that was used to dismember Hiroshi. He had also googled some sketchy things just before the murder, such as can bleach remove fingerprints. The prosecution would state that they believed that Runa was inspired by the horror movie Terrifier, which is a movie that she had rented only days before committing the murder. They came to this conclusion because of the video recording that she had taken. Apparently this video recording was like for like for one of the scenes inside of the movie. Chillingly, it also came out that just days before the murder, Runa practiced what she was going to do on her own father. So she sat him down, she blindfolded him, and then she handcuffed him, and then did whatever to practice what she was going to do. When I learned that, I honestly couldn't get over it, because Osamu would later say that he had no idea that the murder was going to take place, yet he was allowing his daughter to practice this on him. Runa Tamura has been charged with the murder of Hiroshi Ura. Her trial is still yet to take place.
The grieving relatives are all stood at the funeral sobbing, wondering who the hell could have done this, not realising the killer was stood right behind them. Before we get into this case, I've got a bunch of deep dives over on my podcast, The Born Investigation, and I post a brand new episode over there every single week. It was April 2015 in beautiful Sandusky, Ohio. Heather Bogle was just 28 years old with big dreams. She wanted to make it as a nurse, so she'd been going to nursing school. She was just a whisker away from getting there, but she was absolutely gutted because she'd failed her final exams. So despite being absolutely devastated, she thought, I'm not going to give up on my dream. She had a 5-year-old little girl and she just wanted a great life for them both. So she decided, I'm going to revise really hard, I'm going to take a temporary job, and I'm going to take the test again. So she started working night shifts at this washing machine factory to basically earn some extra cash on the side. I guess you get paid a little bit extra for doing night shifts. I know that that's certainly the case when my mum was a single mum and she was trying to raise me and my brother. But luck really was not on Heather's side, because as if failing the exam wasn't hard enough, she ended up breaking up with her girlfriend Carmela. They'd been together a year, but because of Heather's tight schedule, they basically just didn't see each other enough. And Heather's priority, understandably, was her little girl, which is what made the next part so unusual. On the 9th of April, Heather left work just after 6 a.m. and totally vanished. She was due to pick up her daughter and just never did, so her frantic mum ended up calling police. It was kind of like the only other option. And so police were like, right, we need to find Heather's car. If we can find the car, we might be able to find a clue as to where Heather's gone. And sure enough, they tracked her vehicle to a block of flats around a mile away from her work. But it wasn't good news. They slowly approached the car, but the seats were empty. So as protocol, they thought, right, okay, well, we'll open the boot of the car to see if there's any clues. They needed trauma therapy after what they saw in the boot of that car. Heather's lifeless body, tied up, brutally beaten, and I've never actually seen this in a crime case before, but her fingernails had been cut down to the cuticles like she'd been tortured. They were like, what kind of monster would do this? Now, her autopsy showed that she had bravely tried to fight back, but ultimately died from gunshot wounds. Friends, family, the whole local community showed up at the funeral, absolutely devastated, wondering who the hell could have done this. They were kind of looking over their shoulder, thinking somebody must know something. And one man in the room placed a generous donation in the box with a lovely note. It said, I am distraught there will be no more of your smile at work. You will always be in my thoughts. Those were the words of her killer. Police got to work checking the ex-girlfriend's alibi out because, as we all know, you're most likely to be killed by a romantic partner or an ex. But her alibi checked out and she cooperated fully, so they were pretty satisfied. Then they turned their attention to the neighbours. They were thinking, has Heather had any beef with anybody? Well, she hadn't, but one detective was just really adamant that it was the neighbour who'd done this. I guess one guy in the block of flats had convictions for violent offences and firearms, so they kind of just got tunnel vision on him. They announced these 3 suspects. It was this guy in the flat and 2 of his associates. They were ready to arrest them, and then the DNA profile came back and it didn't match any of them. The lab was like, nope, not a match. Back to square one. It was years before a new detective took over and had quite a bright idea. Check her location data from her Google account on her phone. Maybe that's gonna give kind of like a bit of a gingerbread trail as to where she went. It turned out after work she'd weirdly been at a colleague's address. This guy was Daniel Myers. And when they quizzed him about Heather, he was like, I barely knew her. So they said, well, why did you write such a heartfelt message at her funeral? And why was she at your house the morning she was murdered? And the DNA came back, a match for Daniel Myers. Now, before we get into whether justice was done or not, be prepared for your blood to boil. The officer that was originally on the case that was obsessed with the 3 people in the neighbouring block, Sean O'Connell, turns out people emailed him saying, you need to look into this guy called Daniel Myers. And he read the emails and went, delete. Not only that, but he also was found to have falsified police documents, so he was given 24 months in prison. Thanks to him, a killer could have literally taken more victims. Daniel admitted to luring Heather to his house after work when she was upset. Police believe that he made advances to her and she declined, and he got very aggressive and decided to torture her. He pleaded guilty and got life in prison, but prepare for your mind to be blown because 10 women then came forward to say that he'd actually AR'd them, but they were too scared to come forward and report it. And in 2009, Daniel's ex-girlfriend, Lee Ann, was found dead, again from a gunshot wound. Now, it was ruled a self-unaliving, but the weapon that she allegedly used was a long-barreled rifle. That doesn't feel right to me. And Leanne's sister is certain that Daniel killed her. And the police were like, actually, Heather's murder was cleaned up very professionally, almost like somebody had done this before.
What is that one unsolved case that you cannot stop thinking about? For me, it's the case of Dorothy Scott, who for months before her murder was being stalked by a creepy man. She was then abducted in plain sight from under her friends' noses from a hospital, and to this day, her case is still unsolved. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Dorothy Jane Scott. This is a shorter version of this case. To hear a fuller deep dive, head over to the True Crime Caitlin podcast. 32-year-old Dorothy was a single mother living with her auntie in Anaheim, California. She was a little bit on the reserved side. When she wasn't at work as a secretary, she would be at home with her son Sean, who was the light of her life. Dorothy adored Sean, and she would soak up every spare minute that she could with him, either watching cartoons together or reading together. She was described by her family as kind, caring, generous, the type of person where if you were called, she would take the shirt off her back to give it to you. In October 1979, Dorothy began to receive really strange phone calls to her work phone and her home phone. On the other side was a man, and she thought that she recognized his voice, but she just couldn't place it. The phone call started off with him professing his love and obsession, adoration and attraction to Dorothy. But when that wasn't reciprocated, the tone began to shift. The man began to stalk Dorothy. He would ring her and tell her that he had been watching her all day long and he could prove it. He would tell her what she'd been wearing, where she'd gone, what she had done. Only things that he would know if he had in fact been stalking her. On one occasion, he rang Dorothy and told her to quickly pop outside because he had left a gift for her. And she did. She went outside to find a single dead rose on the windshield of her car. The phone calls became threatening, and soon this man started to tell Dorothy that he was going to come her way, and when he got his hands on her, he was going to chop her up into little pieces until no one could find her. In May 1980, Dorothy would drop off little Sean at her parents' house while she had to go to an evening meeting at work. Once here, she noticed that one of her colleagues, a man named Conrad, had a really bad looking red rash on his arm. He had sores that were the size of golf balls, and Dorothy knew that that didn't look right. She offered to take Conrad to the hospital so that he could get looked at, and he agreed, another colleague named Pam tagging along with them. It turned out that Conrad had been bitten by a black widow spider, but he was going to be okay. They had managed to catch it in time, and he was prescribed antibiotics. While Pam and Conrad waited in the hospital for Conrad's prescription, Dorothy offered to go and get her car and pull it to the front and pick them up at the door. But after watching her leave, they would never see her again. Sometime later, Pam and Conrad were stood outside of the hospital waiting for Dorothy when her car started to pull towards them, but it wasn't slowing down, it was speeding up. The car flew right past the two, racing away, driving right through a stop sign, and they couldn't see who was driving it because the car had its full beam headlights on and it blinded the two. This didn't make sense. Why would Dorothy speed away from them, driving the car so erratically, purposefully blinding them with the full beam headlights? Unless something was wrong. Pam would ring Dorothy's mum to ask if something had happened at home, but she said no, there was no reason for Dorothy to speed away like that. That evening, Dorothy Jane Scott would be reported missing, and only hours later, her car would be found in nearby Santa Ana, and it was engulfed in flames. Someone had doused it in gasoline and then set it alight. Thankfully, Dorothy herself wasn't found in the car. But where was she? This was a clear indicator to the police and investigators working on this case that Dorothy didn't just leave of her own accord. If she wanted to run away and start a new life or anything like that, why would she get rid of her only mode of transport? Weeks into the investigation into Dorothy's disappearance, her parents, Vera and Jacob, started to receive horrifying phone calls. A man had rang, and when Vera picked up the phone, he asked her if she was related to Dorothy Jane Scott, which Vera said, yes, she is her daughter, I am her mother. And he responded coldly, bluntly, quote, I've got her, before hanging up the phone. It's believed that that was the same man who had been stalking Dorothy for months. He would actually go on to reach out to a big local newspaper and admitted that he was the abductor and murderer of Dorothy. He was able to provide details that no one else should have known, such as what colour scarf Dorothy was wearing. No one knew that Dorothy had actually popped into her home on her way to the hospital and changed her scarf. She started the night wearing a red one and ended it wearing a black one. He detailed jewellery that she was wearing, and also that Conrad had been bitten by a black widow spider. He told the paper that he was in love with Dorothy and that he had murdered her because she was cheating on him, which, how could she have been? She didn't even know this man, and she was definitely not in a relationship with him. Despite the best efforts of police, they were never able to track down, trace or identify the caller. 4 years after her disappearance, Dorothy Jane Scott would be found. Her skeletal remains were discovered in Anaheim Hills, and actually only part of her skeleton was found. Alongside some of Dorothy's bones, there was also the skeleton of a dog, which really confused the investigators. Even after the discovery of Dorothy's remains, we are still no closer to discovering who done this to her, who had been stalking her, abducted her, and then murdered her. The person who did this evil man, got away with it, and I just think, does he have more victims that we don't know about? To hear this case in further detail, where I go through the entire investigation, all of the suspects and much more, make sure to tune in to the episode on the True Crime Caitlin podcast.
So this horrible mom wants to cover up the fact that she took the life of her little boy by faking his disappearance. And this woman's name is Joanne Cunningham. She's in her 30s, living in Illinois, and one day day, Joanne meets Andrew. He's around 60 years old and he is just as much of a junkie as she is. They're not exactly a power couple, but hey, that's her man. And soon enough, they start hooking up and living together in this nasty house. The floors are completely ripped up, there is dog shits everywhere, and it smells like old pee because Joanne didn't care enough to clean. But I guess that didn't slow them down because eventually Joanne gets pregnant. And let's be crystal clear, pregnancy was not an excuse for her to get clean because she kept on using. And 9 months later, she actually gives birth to a baby boy. They name him AJ, and the sad part is when doctors ran tests on him, they found out that he had dangerous substances in his system. And if you can't guess why, let me tell you. Joanne could not stop getting high, or maybe she just didn't care enough to stop, which honestly, I don't even know which one is worse. But luckily, for like a minute, child services stepped in and they did their job. They took AJ away and placed him with a foster family. And for the first 18 months of his life, this baby got to know real safety. He had a clean bed, real meals, and people who cared about him. And I wish with everything in me that AJ could have stayed there forever, but he didn't. For reasons I will never understand, the system decided that Joanne and Andrew were good enough to get AJ back. Supposedly they completed some parenting classes and treatment programs, so apparently that was good enough. So just like that, AJ was stripped from this loving home and sent right back into their care. And from the second AJ stepped back into that house, his life turned into a living nightmare. Bruises start showing up all over him, and the excuse was always the same. Oh, it was just an accident. And to make it even worse, Joanne had AJ trained to lie about the bruises if anyone ever asked. Like, there was one time a cop had questioned what happened, and Joanne whispered for him to say the family dog did it. And of course, AJ repeats it because he's just a little kid who wants to protect his mom, not realizing that she's the one hurting him. And then there was another time when AJ ended up in the ER and doctors had gently asked him, hey, what happened? And he goes, maybe someone hit me with the belt. Maybe my mom didn't mean it. I'm sorry, how do you hear that from a child and not shut the situation down immediately? How do you not ring the biggest alarm on earth? Apparently everybody's blind because social workers came over multiple times seeing the condition that this little boy was living in, and they still said, looks fine to me. This is making my head itchy because what? You guys, the floors are literally stained with dog urine. There is trash piled up really high. There are kids with bruises, but sure, everything looks completely fine. There is absolutely nothing to worry about. So now AJ is stuck. He is stuck in this house of hell. He is stuck with people who should never have the right to raise a goldfish, let alone a child. And then one night on April 14th, 2019, AJ has an accident. He poops his pants, which can happen sometimes. He's a baby. But then he tries to hide it because he knows what happens when his mom finds out. And unfortunately, Joanne does find out and she loses her mind. So in her sick attempt of trying to, I guess, discipline him, she drags him into a freezing cold shower and forces him to stand there for the next 20 minutes. He's just standing there shivering, and for whatever dumb reason, Joanne takes a metal shower head and starts him, yelling at him for doing something that he couldn't even help. And when she's finally done, she doesn't dry him or comfort him. I honestly don't know why I'd expect her to, but instead she sends him to bed still soaking wet and cold. Joanne goes about the rest of her night completely ignoring him, and then the next morning she goes back into the room and AJ was no longer alive. I can't even imagine how bad that beating must have been for him to just overnight. But here's the crazy thing though, instead of calling for help, Joanne and Andrew just start panicking. One of them grabs the phone and they start Googling child CPR, but I'm like, it's too late for that, don't you think? And when that obviously doesn't work, they start realizing, oh my god, if anybody finds out about this, we are both going to go to jail for the rest of our lives. And because their IQs are apparently in the negative, they both decide, hey, let's just pretend our 5-year-old son went missing. And so the very first thing Andrew does is hide AJ's body. He him into a plastic tote in the basement, and while he's just lying there inside of this box, Joanne and Andrew start rehearsing how they're gonna tell this story to the cops. They're like, remember, AJ went to bed at 9. AJ went to bed at 9, and when we woke up, he was gone. And for the next few days, that's literally the BS story they rehearsed over and over again. And then a couple days later, Andrew drives 7 miles outside of town and he buries AJ inside of this shallow grave under some power lines. And get this, he doesn't just bury AJ, he also buries AJ's the cleaning supplies, the bleach, the gloves, the duct tape, basically an entire grocery list of evidence gets buried right along with him. Because again, they are the criminals of the year. And so the next morning on April 18th, Joanne and Andrew call 911, and just like they've rehearsed, they tell cops that AJ had gone to bed at around 9 p.m., but when they woke up, poof, he was gone, and they honestly think that he was abducted. And to really sell it, Joanne starts crying on the phone, begging these officers to please search for her boy. And I guess their acting was pretty convincing because even the neighbors believed them. So police launch this massive search for AJ. They bring in dogs, helicopters, even the FBI. Neighbors are out there with flashlights yelling AJ's name, not knowing he's already buried somewhere in a shallow grave. But Joanne doesn't stop there. She apparently also went on live television, bawling her eyes out, begging for AJ to come home. That just reminded me of Chris Watts. And of course, the whole community is eating this up, thinking that, oh, she's just a poor mom who lost her kid. So at some point, they decide to hold a candlelight vigil for AJ at a local park. Joanne and Andrew both show up, crying and hugging people, praying, acting like they're so heartbroken. So by now, they're feeling pretty freaking confident that they're gonna get away with this. But here's where their whole plan goes completely wrong. Their acting was good enough to fool the average person, I'll give them that, but not trained detectives. Because from day one of them reporting AJ missing, the cops can sense that they had something to do with it. First of all, for two people who supposedly rehearsed their little BS story, they couldn't even keep their story straight. One minute it was, oh yeah, he went to bed at 9, and then the other it was like, I don't remember what time he went to sleep at. Another minute it's, I think he got kidnapped, and then, no, he must have just walked out. I mean, it's safe to say the cops did not believe not one word that came out their mouth. And to make their innocence look even worse, the condition of their house just screamed abuse. And that's when they decided to talk to AJ's little brother, and boy was that when the story started to crack. In a very gentle way, police ask him, hey, what happened to your brother AJ? And the first thing he says is, mommy told me I'm not allowed to talk about that. Boom, right there, that's already suspicious. So of course they keep talking to him, and eventually he says, AJ fell down the stairs. He has a lot of owies, which is something his parents never mentioned. And while all of this is happening, detectives are searching through Andrew and Joanne's search history. And as you can assume, they find something that is going to ruin their entire story. At around 3 a.m. on April 15, 2019, someone had typed in child CPR. And that's huge because that's 3 days before they ever called 911 to report AJ missing. So now it is pretty obvious that AJ was already gone by that point. And so detectives bring Andrew in, and they basically go, hey, so do you mind explaining why you were Googling this at 3 a.m. 3 days before you reported your son missing? And with that, Andrew knows the gig is up. He cracks under the pressure and he tells them everything. How Joanne lost it and unalived AJ, and even telling them the exact location that he buried his body. Detectives go straight to that shallow grave right underneath the power lines, and they find AJ. And not a second later, police immediately go and arrest Andrew and Joanne, finally putting an end to their disgusting plan. And by the end of trial, Joanne ends up getting 35 years and Andrew gets 30, which honestly is not enough. They should have gotten life, but okay. At least Andrew won't be getting out until he's like 90 years old. Joanne, on the other hand, can be set free at 71, which is a little too much wiggle room for me. But the average lifetime is like 75 years old, so that makes me feel a little better. So hopefully her luck runs out quick. I love ya. I will see you in my next video. Mwah! Group hug.
When high school drama ends in cold-blooded murder, this group of teenagers lured and killed their 15-year-old friend. This case is most well known for interrogation footage of officers telling these teenagers that they've been caught, they're going to be charged with first-degree murder, and they're going away for life.
We're all in for murder. I don't want my mommy. I want my mommy. You mean people are gonna hate us for this? This is our life now. Oh my God.
Seth Jackson was the baby of the family. He was the youngest of 3 brothers living in Summerfield, Florida. Growing up, Seth was a very happy child. He was very friendly. He was just overall just a very normal guy. At only 14 years old, Seth got in his first real relationship with a 14-year-old girl named Amber Wright. Amber came from a very different background than Seth and hung out in a very different crowd. At only 14, 15 years old, Amber's best friend was an 18-year-old girl named Charlie Ely, who moved to Florida after graduating high school, started dating her soon-to-be stepbrother, married her soon-to-be stepbrother after only knowing him for 2 months. Charlie's new husband was then sent to jail for violating his probation right after the wedding, so there was absolutely no honeymoon period. While her new husband is in jail, 18-year-old Charlie was living alone in her own trailer, and despite being 18 years old, a legal adult, and out of high school, Charlie's trailer became the place for all the really young high school kids to hang out at and party. Weird. I feel like when we were all like 15 years old, we all knew someone that was like out of high school but still going to high school parties. But in this instance, Charlie is the one throwing the high school parties, and her best friend is 14 years old. Also in Amber's friend group was a 20-year-old named Justin Soto, an 18-year-old named Michael Bargo, and her 16-year-old half-brother named Kyle. I know it's a lot of names, but please keep with me. They're all very important. These guys all had a very similar background. They were from low-income families, they had rough home lives, they had a criminal history, and they abused alcohol and substances. This crowd was a very different crowd than Seth was used to hanging out with, and pretty much everyone agreed that Seth's new girlfriend Amber and her friends were like a really bad influence on Seth. Amber and Seth dated for over a year, and it was a very extreme young love, but was also extremely toxic. There was a lot of fights, a lot of jealousy. Seth was pretty much convinced that his girlfriend Amber was being unfaithful and that she was cheating on him with her older friend, 18-year-old Michael Bargo. Amber always denied cheating on Seth with Michael, but funny thing, as soon as Amber broke up with Seth in March of 2011, she immediately started dating Michael. It's always the ones that they tell you not to worry about. And the breakup between Amber and Seth was definitely not civil. Like a lot of young kids do, Seth and Amber are like 15 years old at this point. They take their breakup drama to social media. Very publicly, they were bashing each other, insulting each other, fighting, and airing out each other's personal business. It was just very messy. Seth was also no longer invited to hang out with his ex-girlfriend's group of friends who he once called his best friends because Amber turned them all against Seth. They just like all hated each other now. But Amber's new boyfriend, 18-year-old Michael, hated Seth the most because Michael thought that Seth wanted Amber back, that he wanted to take Amber away from him. Michael was very jealous and angry, and at one point he actually threatened Seth's life. And at a party that Michael and Seth were both at, they actually fought, and Seth actually won, which only fueled Michael's hatred toward Seth so much more. It actually got to a point where Michael went to his girlfriend Amber and all of his friends and said that he hated Seth so much that he wanted him dead. And somehow, all of these individual people agreed. No one tried to stop it. Together, they all started planning how they were going to kill 15-year-old Seth Jackson, someone that they all saw as a friend, a best friend, a boyfriend, not that long ago. This has all escalated so fast between these teenagers, it's almost like insane. Right now, we're in April. Seth and Amber broke up in March, the month earlier. So in a matter of a few weeks, they go from being best friends to planning one of their best friends' murder. Amber knew that Seth wasn't over their breakup, that he wanted to get back together, he wanted her back, that he still had really intense feelings for her. So on April 17th, 2011, Amber starts texting her ex Seth, telling him that she still loves him and she wants him back. And Seth's intuition told him that there was something not right about this, that he shouldn't trust Amber, and he actually believed that this was a trap, a setup to have him jumped. But Amber just kept reassuring Seth that this was really real and she wanted him back. And she asked Seth if he would meet up with her so they could talk. And against his better judgment, Seth followed his heart and he agreed to meet up with Amber. Amber and Charlie met up with Seth and lured him back to Charlie's trailer. When inside the trailer, the two girls went and hid in a back room when 20-year-old Justin, 18-year-old Michael, and 16-year-old Kyle all started to beat up 15-year-old Seth. It was very intense and very brutal, and at one point, Michael pulled out a weapon that he brought with him and he shot Seth. Despite being shot, Seth still got up and he tried to escape with his life. The boys grabbed him and they threw Seth into the bathtub. And that's when Michael took out the weapon and he just opened fire on Seth again and again and again, which ended 15-year-old Seth's life. His body was then brought out to a fire pit in the yard and they burned his body for hours. Amber and Kyle's 37-year-old stepfather, James Heavens, actually knew of the plan for these teenagers to kill a 15-year-old boy and actually helped them dispose of Seth's ashes. Seth's ashes were filled into paint cans and then the paint cans were dumped in a water-filled quarry. And it wasn't long for Seth's loving parents to report their 15-year-old son missing. And the coverage of his disappearance aired on the local TV. And reportedly, 16-year-old Kyle, who participated in killing Seth, saw this coverage on TV and felt so guilty that he confessed to his mother what happened and his mom called the police. And at the station, 16-year-old Kyle confessed everything. The rest of the group were then brought in for questioning and they were questioned separately at first. And at first, they all tried to either deny that they were there or they all told different stories where they blamed each other. But it was done. They were going down. 18-year-old Charlie, 15-year-old Amber, and 16-year-old Kyle were all put into a room together, and this was after 16-year-old Kyle confessed and told the officers everything. And here's some footage of what they were saying to each other.
I had to. They knew we were lying.
Is that your mom's purse?
Yeah.
Did she leave it? No.
So, we've interviewed Amber, Charlie, and no. You can't now. I know you're lying to me. I'm sorry, guys.
He's not gonna wait for me.
I'm
Terrified.
I am too.
Because I'm actually going to an actual jail. And then an actual prison. It's no like juvenile.
Well, I'll probably be going.
You can't, you're 15.
Yep, they can trial me as an adult.
And that's it. If they don't do anything, if like they don't do anything about us with us, then we're gonna have to watch our backs.
Well, like,
With anybody.
I mean, people are gonna hate us for this. People that don't even know us are gonna be looking for us if we get out of this.
why?
There's a 15-year-old kid murdered because of us.
And here is some footage of the 18, 16, and 15-year-olds finding out that they were going to be charged with first-degree murder. And I actually really, really respect this officer. She's not playing any games. She gets right down to business.
This is the story. You're an adult, correct? Juvenile and juvenile, correct? All right? Mm-hmm. You two are under 18 and you're 18. You're all going to be booked with first-degree premeditated murder. You two will go to the Juvenile Assessment Center. You will go to the Marion County Jail. Okay? Take a deep breath. You'll have no bond. You won't be getting out.
How many years?
Oh, honey, this is not... Listen to me. Everybody just take a deep breath.
Like, well, since we really didn't do anything.
No. See, but you did. First of all, let's get over that hump right now, okay? That we really didn't do anything because everybody's complicit here. A person died. A person was murdered, okay? We all knew about it. We all planned it. We were all involved in getting it done. So let's hop that hurdle first, okay? Let's man up to the fact that, damn it, this was a pretty heinous crime and we all had something to do with it. Now we got to deal with what will happen to us from that, okay?
We're all in for murder. What? Did you say, why did you lie? This is our life now.
Oh my God,
man. We didn't do anything with the body or anything like that. I get 5 years, I'm 20 by the time I get out. And I'm gone, Joe. Joe's gonna be gone. He's not gonna stay at all. This is all because of Mike. Like, that's all. I'm so scared. I'm gonna get my ass beat in there. I think Like, can I get fresh little meat? I'm probably gonna be the smallest fucking person in there. Oh, it always is. Oh, you guys are going to the juvenile thing. I'm going to the big thing. Have you seen the juvenile? The juvenile is fucking crazy. The jail is full of fucking older people now. Now the juvenile is all these. I'm so scared. It's gonna leave me.
Amber and Kyle's stepfather, 37-year-old James Havens, was sentenced to 30 years in prison for accessory of murder after the fact. 20-year-old Justin Soto pled guilty to avoid the death penalty, and he is currently serving life without the possibility of parole. Amber and Kyle, who were minors at the time, were both tried as adults, and they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but that was later changed to life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Charlie Ely was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, but her first-degree murder charge was later overturned, and instead she was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 10 years, but at that point she was released on time served, so she is currently out today. An 18-year-old Michael Barga was sentenced to death, making him the youngest person in the entire state on death row. He has tried to appeal his sentence multiple times, but has always been denied. This is such a heartbreaking and senseless case. How many people's lives were absolutely ruined, and for what? And poor Seth, who was only 15 years old and lost his life because he was going to meet up with his ex-girlfriend because he thought that they were going to get back together. My heart is absolutely broken for Seth and all of his family and all of his friends. I'm extremely interested to hear all your thoughts in the comments. How does something like this happen? This group of teenagers, how do they go from being friends with someone a couple weeks later doing something so terrible? Please let me know all your thoughts in the comments. While you're there, please be respectful. Thank you so much for listening to Seth Jackson's story.
This is probably the scariest internet cult. I think I would even say the scariest because, quite frankly, I don't know how you could get any worse than this. And it all started in a bedroom in Texas. Moms, if you have children, if you care about internet safety at all, I beg you, please listen to this. This is the story of the 764 cult. Massive warning, it's graphic, it's disturbing. We're also talking about children, so if you think that listening to this it's gonna harm your mental health in any way, shape, or form, please skip this video, but I do think that this is something incredibly important to listen to. This entire story starts with a 15-year-old boy in his bedroom, a boy called Bradley Chance Cadenhead. Bradley was one of 4 children, and he lived in Stephenville in Texas, a small town of about 22,000 people, about an hour southwest of Fort Worth. And Bradley had a very, very tough time at school because he just couldn't get along with anyone. It felt like everyone that he came across just eventually turned into a bully, and bullying was a daily thing for him, so much so that the only place that Bradley felt like he could truly be himself was tucked away at home in his bedroom. He pretty much only left the house to either go to school or go to Sunday church with his family, but apart from that, he preferred being alone. And by the age of 8 years old, having unlimited access to the internet was starting to become quite the alarming thing for Bradley, to put it lightly. Because videos and content that most children would stumble into by accident were the kind of things that Bradley began to seek out. He started looking up certain things like mature content, but then it turned into graphic, gruesome content, and then scary horror stories. But slowly but surely, all of these kind of different graphic things online began meshing into one, and Bradley started to become fascinated with very, very violent things. All kinds of things, by the way, like every graphic, scary, gross thing on the internet, anything that you could imagine, Bradley was looking up. And consuming so much of this content naturally started to change the way that his brain was working, really. The kind of thoughts that he started having, even the way that he behaved, started to change, and it began affecting not only his family dynamic, but also the way that he was at school. And eventually his teachers were alarmed by his behavior because he would talk about these violent things that he wanted to do at school, which as a teacher, I assume that that's just about the worst thing that you can hear, especially coming from a student, especially that young. After a series of threats from Bradley to the school, his assistant principal alerted authorities about him and about the things that he was saying. That ended up leading into an investigation against him, but disciplinary measures did not stop him. Bradley kept on talking about these things. He kept on using school computers to look up very violent, aggressive things. Like every red flag that a kid can show, he was showing. By only 13 years old, his obsession had grown into him actually wanting to do these things, actually wanting to commit these crimes and hurt people. That was around the time in his life that he was like, okay, enough of me having all of these thoughts in my head, I'm ready to act on them. And it of course did not help that he also had so much built up resentment against so many kids at the school because of the bullying. So he again threatened to bring a weapon into the school, and for that he was placed in a juvenile detention center. By his early teenage years, Bradley had suffered multiple psychological breakdowns and over time
continued to only become increasingly isolated. He just wanted to be alone in his own thoughts. He didn't care about people. He actually didn't care about anything at all. At one point, he confided in one of his probation officers about how he just stopped caring altogether about anything and anyone. And then at 15 years old, Bradley dropped out of school completely. He just refused to go. And by the way, if it's not obvious, I don't think that his family dynamic was the best. I think that his mom and his siblings eventually moved out of the house, and obviously nothing that his dad did was really able to change Bradley, but he just stopped going to school entirely. He would pretend to go to school in the morning, he would wait for his dad to go to work, and then he would come back home and spend the entire day at home. Eventually, his parents found out. They were not happy, but no matter what they did to try and get him back into school, it just didn't work. And him dropping out now obviously led to him having 24 hours a day available to look up things on the internet, to plan things out, and eventually to act on them. After dropping out, his online usage was at its peak, and the obsession that he had with pictures and videos that were violent in nature only grew and grew the older that he got. And eventually, one day when he was playing the video game Minecraft, Bradley came across a person that shared those same sick and twisted fascinations, and then he came across another one, and then another one, and then another one. And this was the most exciting thing that had happened to Bradley in a while, because he discovered this secret, dark, maybe not so secret, I don't know, this dark corner of the internet where all of these people shared a similar interest for the same kind of disturbing things. And in his head, he's thinking, this is so awesome. This is the coolest thing ever. I have so many friends now and I just keep adding more and more. How do I take this to the next level? In late 2020, early 2021, when the world was essentially on pause and when teenagers were stuck inside and were flocking to online spaces, Bradley Caden had created something new. A name for this community that he had built. He called it 764, named after the first 3 digits of Stephenville zip code 76401 and 76402. And what he created within this group and the hopes and the dreams that he had for 764 would be the stuff of nightmares and some of the worst things that even the FBI has seen in modern day. But of course, Bradley Cadenhead, unfortunately, isn't the first person to have these kind of gruesome, violent thoughts. And to want to make them become a reality, unfortunately, there have been others before him. But with access to the internet, looking those up came extremely easy. So Bradley took inspiration, I guess you could say, from an existing online network called CVLT. CVLT was an online group that ran from around 2019 to around 2020, founded by a French man who went by Rohan. And within this group, members would target vulnerable children online, usually teenagers struggling with mental health issues and or looking for some sort of connection. They would build up trust, get them to send photos of themselves, and yes, you know what kind of photos I'm talking about, and then they would use those photos as leverage, and then they would be able to say, do this or else we will send these photos to everyone in your life. And the demands that they had were incredibly disturbing. For a lack of a better word, I will give you just one example. A common demand was to hop on online cameras and carve the usernames of the people in charge into your arms and legs. Sometimes the injuries got so bad that you would be able to see the bone. And that's not even close to the worst of it, believe it or not. But the members would then record all of these things and either share the videos within the network or sell them online. Sick. And that's who Bradley was looking to for inspiration as to what he wanted to do with 764. Bradley would take part fully in CVLT. He would participate to learn the techniques, to see what they were saying to the vulnerable kids, to know and learn how to pick his targets, and to know how to maintain control through fear. He looked at that group as like some sort of training, pretty much. And the one goal that Bradley had was to take things further. CVLT had gotten media attention for the brutality of what they made children do, and Bradley wanted his group to be worse, more extreme, more notorious. He saw CVLT's infamy and he wanted to surpass it. According to court documents, 764 was meant to, quote, take it to a whole different level, a lot worse, end quote. And I can't tell you the exact things that Bradley wanted to do and did do, because saying those things out loud, quite frankly, is not allowed on this platform. But essentially what he wanted to do was make children, vulnerable children online, trust him, get a hold of something to be able to hold that thing over their heads, and then force them to do certain things, essentially turning children into weapons against themselves. And a lot of times, his demands ended in someone losing their life. 764 operated on Discord, Telegram, Roblox, Snapchat, Instagram, and other platforms where children gather. And their tactics were spelled out in manuals that were circulated amongst the group so that everyone would know the goal and everyone would have the same goal. These were their steps. Members would, first of all, find vulnerable victims online. A manual released by an affiliated group called No Lives Matter instructed, quote, the best women to target are ones that have depression or mentally ill ones, end quote. They also targeted children in mental health communities, LGBTQ plus spaces, and ED groups. Secondly, they would gain trust. Members would befriend the victims, initiate online relationships, even fake romantic interest at times. Then they would obtain compromising material, likely through some sort of manipulation. And lastly, they would demand. They would tell their victims what they needed to do or else. And you guys are gonna have to look up what some of these things are, because I quite literally can't figure out how to say it without saying it, but I promise you, whatever you're thinking, it is 10 times worse. And by now you may be wondering, well, what exactly would push someone to do this? What did the members get out of this? Well, in their heads, within their group, they would get status, fame, power. The content that they were able to manipulate out of victims would then be compiled into what was called a digital lore book. These lore books were then traded like currency within the 764 network, archived in encrypted quote-unquote vault, used to recruit new members and used to maintain status within the group. According to the Department of Justice, quote, the more extreme, the better. And as far as Bradley Cadenhead himself, he described himself to be a cult leader, and he was fully and completely celebrated by his followers and looked at as some sort of god for, quote, creating a legendary group. 764's ideological framework is rooted in seeing no value in human life. They also follow similar beliefs to that of Satanism and the occult. And besides causing pain, one of their main goals, another main goal of 764, according to authorities, was to, quote, create chaos and destroy society. An FBI special agent who has been working with the FBI for 50 years said that 764 is, quote, by far the most graphic material that I have ever encountered. He described the mentality, quote, there's no real end goal in sight for these groups. There's no, okay, if we break down society, we're going to rebuild it as such. It's destruction for the sake of destructing. On August 25th of 2021, police showed up at Bradley Cadenhead's mother's apartment with a search warrant. Discord had flagged and reported the group after authorities traced an upload of CSAM to Bradley's account, and on Bradley's laptop, police found everything that they needed to in order to be able to arrest him. In March of 2023, 17-year-old Bradley pleaded guilty to 9 counts of possession with intent to promote. And on May 16th of 2023, he was sentenced to 80 years in prison. During sentencing, the prosecutor reportedly told the judge, quote, very rarely do we get a chance to look evil in the face, end quote. Today, he is 20 years old, I think, and he is serving his sentence in Huntsville, Texas. He was denied parole in May of 2025, and I really doubt that he will ever get out of there, thankfully. But get this, his arrest in 2021 did not stop 764. All it did was scatter it. The group essentially divided into several smaller groups, operating under different names so they all wouldn't get in trouble, and they likely, probably, are still operating online, which is terrifying. Law enforcement estimated in 2024 that this group includes hundreds of people online still doing the same thing but under different names. A police detective explained, quote, think of this less as a group and think of it more as an ideology. It does not matter what they're called. There are a lot of actors out there encouraging this type of behavior, so it's everywhere. It's in every community, end quote. So this is still technically an ongoing investigation, and as of December of 2025, authorities have taken significant action. There have been 350 plus FBI investigations across the United States tied to 764 and or similar networks. And at least 35 people have been publicly charged by the Department of Justice with suspected ties to 764 or affiliated networks. And some of their victims identified have been as young as 9 years old. I am not a parent, so I don't even know how you would feel as a parent, especially of a young child listening to this, because I'm scared and I have no children. But as a parent, what you can do is monitor your children's online activities, have open conversations about internet safety, watch what platforms and what apps they're on and using, set parental controls, and of course report any suspicious activity to authorities. Yeah, that's it for me today. I am so uncomfortable. Let me know your thoughts on this, and thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you. He was a college student who visited North Korea and came back in a coma with brain damage. I don't even think I have the words to explain how terrifying this story is, so we're just gonna get straight into it. Otto Warmbier was from a small suburb near Cincinnati, Ohio. He was one of 3 children to his parents, Fred and Cindy. He was raised in a 2-story home and has very often been described to be just an all-American boy. He attended a top-ranked high school in Ohio and graduated as the 2nd highest ranking student in his grade. But not only did he exceed academically, he was also a very gifted athlete. He was a swimmer and a soccer player, and a coach of his has said that he was just kind of a natural leader. On top of that, he was also prom king, so a pretty great guy all around. He had a lot going for him. After high school, he attended the University of Virginia with a scholarship, and he was the kind of guy that had his future planned out. He knew what he wanted for himself, he knew what he wanted out of life, and he was going to do whatever he needed to do to make it happen, all while still making his friends and his family a big priority of his. He was a pretty organized person by the sounds of it. He had a big calendar hung up in his dorm room, and on there he had everything from birthdays to assignments to sporting games to make sure that he never forgot anything. Otto's dream was working in investment banking, and by the fall of his junior year, he had landed himself an internship with a finance company, and he was very eager to get to work. That being said, before graduating uni, he wanted to take every and any opportunity that he had to travel because he had always been curious about other places, other cultures, and he loved seeing different parts of the world. Otto was supposed to take part in a study abroad program in Hong Kong in early 2016, and he thought to himself, hey, I'm already going to be abroad, why don't I make a pit stop to North Korea while I'm there? His dad said that Otto had always been curious about their culture and had always wanted to meet the people of North Korea. So that's what he decided to do. 21-year-old Otto booked a tour of North Korea with Young Pioneer Tours. They were a China-based company, and their whole slogan was, quote, budget travel to destinations your mother would rather you stayed away from, end quote. It would be a 5-day, 4-night trip with a group, and with them at all times, they would have state-sponsored tour guides. So Otto put down the deposit for $1,200, and then he got ready to meet up with the tour group at the Beijing airport. Then they all flew together to North Korea's capital. Out of their group, there was only 2 people who had traveled alone, obviously Otto, and then there was a man called Danny Grattan. Danny was from the UK, and he became Otto's roommate for the 5-day trip. Regarding Otto, he said, quote, from the second I met him, we hit it off. He was very bright, intelligent, and likable. The hotel they were staying at in North Korea, I've seen has often been referred to as the Alcatraz of fun, and if you didn't know, Alcatraz was famous for being America's most notorious maximum security federal prison. But the hotel in North Korea, I guess, had that nickname because the hotel itself was pretty isolated. It's on an island, but within the building there are restaurants, bowling alleys, spas, casinos. So if you're visiting and you're staying there, you are isolated, but you can find plenty different entertainment places to keep yourself occupied. Also, obviously, you can leave the hotel. Anyway, that's where they were going to be staying, Otto rooming with his new friend Danny. Early on in the trip, there were definitely some things that made Otto feel cautious, or just little things that made him pause for a second. For example, they went on a tour to tour a ship. The ship was an American Navy ship that had been captured by North Korea in the 1960s. And while touring it, the North Korean tour guide was talking about how they were able to capture the ship from, quote unquote, the imperial enemy, aka referring to America as the imperial enemy. The 82 American people that were captured with the ship were held and starved for 11 months by North Korea. Otto also saw billboards around that made it clear that North Korea did not like America. North Korea saw America as their #1 enemy. Things like that definitely made Otto think, whoa, I am visiting enemy territory. But he always found a way to laugh it off and eventually just go back to actually enjoying the tour. December 31st obviously was New Year's Eve 2015 going into 2016. To celebrate, the group went out, had fun, saw fireworks, and eventually they all made it back to the hotel. Danny Grattan went bowling, and a couple hours went by before he realized that he had not seen Otto. But by the time Danny made it back to their room around 4:30 in the morning, Otto was just in bed. He was sleeping. On January 2nd of 2016, it was time for them to leave North Korea, so Danny and Otto headed off to the airport. After that, remember, Otto was supposed to go to Hong Kong for the study abroad program, and then he had plans to go to Singapore before returning back to the States. But Otto did not make his flight out of North Korea. At the airport, Danny and Otto were the last 2 people to go through passport control. They walked up to the little desk, showed their passports side by side, but the officers were really taking their time looking at them. They were in no rush, when suddenly 2 soldiers walked up to them. One of them tapped Otto on the shoulder, and the 2 of them then escorted Otto away. Danny made a joke when Otto was being ushered away through a wooden door, saying, well, that's the last we'll ever see of you, and Otto nervously laughed before being taken away. That was the last time anyone outside of North Korean custody would ever see Otto Warmbier alive and well. Otto was taken because he was being accused of stealing a poster from a staff-only area of of the second floor hotel they were staying in. North Korean authorities accused him of sneaking into that hallway just before 2 in the morning on January 1st and stealing that poster that had either the name or the image of a North Korean leader on it. They were saying that he stole it because he was encouraged to do so by a Methodist church in Ohio in America. North Korea saying that the American administration told Otto to steal the poster to, quote, harm the work ethic and motivation of the Korean people and bring home a trophy. Which that really made no sense at all because Otto was Jewish, aka not involved with the Methodist church at all. Regardless, stealing items with either the name or the image of a North Korean leader is considered a very serious crime by the North Korean government. North Korea would later release CCTV footage, very grainy footage in black and white from January 1st at 1:57 in the morning, where a shadowy figure in that hallway can be seen removing the poster from the wall and placing it onto the floor. North Korean authorities were claiming that this was Otto. But to say that that person in the video is Otto, to me, is pushing it, because the video is such poor quality to the point where it seems impossible, to me at least, to be able to identify the person in the footage. You can't even really see what the poster looked like at all, really. After his arrest at the airport, Otto completely disappeared from public view. Nobody knew if he was alive or dead. His family got in contact with US government officials who had experience in freeing several Americans who had been imprisoned by North Korea, but they were finding it impossible to find information about where he was and if he was okay. I don't know how true this is, but the tour guide company also stated that they were trying to get a hold of anyone that may know what happened to Otto or try to get in contact with him or anyone that knew where he was, but all they were told was that he was fine. It wasn't until 3 weeks later, 123, that North Korea announced that they were holding Otto for committing a, quote, hostile act against the state. And then in late February, North Korean state news agency released a video of Otto. It is so sad and so scary to watch. In the video, he walks into what looks like a press room almost, and he is completely distraught. He's crying, he looks scared, but he confesses. He looks to be reading from a piece of paper, and he breaks down crying, saying, quote, I never should have allowed myself to be allured by the United States administration to commit a crime in this country. I wish that the United States administration never manipulate people like myself in the future to commit crimes against foreign countries. I entirely beg you, people and government of the DPR Korea, for your forgiveness. Please, I made the worst mistake of my life. He begged for forgiveness so many times and also begged to be allowed to return home, saying, quote, please, I've made the worst mistake of my life, but please act to save me. Please think of my family, end quote. A lot of people believe that he didn't confess because he actually did it. He only confessed because he was forced to and terrified of never being able to return back to America. The following month, in March, so he was detained January 2nd. He's been held by North Korea for a while now, but in March, he faced trial for stealing the poster. His trial lasted 1 hour, and 21-year-old Otto was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in a North Korean prison. This entire time, while this whole thing was going on, of course, Otto's family behind the scenes were doing everything in their power to try and get Otto back home. They were not giving up hope. A year and a half passed from the last time that Otto's family saw him to when they would see him again. Finally, by June of 2017, North Korea agrees to release Otto. And the morning of his return, his parents, Fred and Cindy, were waiting for his plane to land back on American soil. They had not seen Otto since that confession footage was released in February of 2016, and they hadn't spoken to him for even longer. They were feeling extremely anxious. They were waiting in agony, all while feeling hopeful and counting down the seconds in which they would get to hug their son again. They had just before, earlier in the month, I actually think it was the week before based on the reports that I read, but Otto's parents had been made aware that there was something wrong with Otto. They were told something, they made it sound like Otto was unconscious, but they really had no idea the state in which he was in. All they knew really was that he wasn't well, but that he was set to arrive back in the States January 13th. So they waited for the plane to land, and when it did, the stairs came down and Fred, Otto's dad, began walking up and into the plane. When he did, he heard what he described to be, quote, inhuman howling, and then he walked into the plane and realized that that sound was coming from his son. Otto was strapped in a stretcher and his parents did not even recognize him. He was not the same Otto. He was severely brain damaged. He had a shaved head. He was unable to speak. He was unable to see and unable to react to verbal commands. He had a feeding tube, and according to his parents, quote, it looked like someone had taken a pair of pliers and rearranged his bottom teeth, end quote. They also said that his arms and legs were totally deformed. Otto's dad went to hug him and to tell him how much they've missed him this entire time, but it was like Otto wasn't even in there anymore. At the sight of him, Otto's sister and mom ran out of the plane screaming, crying, because they were not prepared to see what they saw. Quote, we thought he was in a coma, but you couldn't call it a coma. What we pictured was that Otto would be asleep and maybe in a medically induced coma. And then when our doctors here would work with him, that he would get the best care and love, and then he would come out of it, end quote. But it did not take long for his family to realize that there would be no saving Otto. He was carried out of the plane by paramedics and taken to the University of Cincinnati's medical center. 6 days later, on June 19th of 2017, Otto passed away. This was his family statement, quote, "It is our sad duty to report that our son, Otto Warmbier, has completed his journey home. Surrounded by his loving family, Otto died today at 2:20 p.m. It would be easy at a moment like this to focus on all that we lost, future time that won't be spent with a warm, engaging, brilliant young man whose curiosity and enthusiasm for life knew no bounds. But we choose to focus on the time we were given to be with this remarkable person. You can tell from the outpouring of emotion from the communities that he touched, Wyoming, Ohio, and the University of Virginia, to name just two, that the love for Otto went well beyond his immediate family. We would like to thank the wonderful professionals at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center who did everything that they could for Otto. Unfortunately, the awful, torturous mistreatment our son received at the hands of the North Koreans ensured that no other outcome was possible beyond the sad one that we experienced today. When Otto returned to Cincinnati late on January 13th, he was unable to speak, unable to see, and unable to react to verbal commands. He looked very uncomfortable, almost anguished. Although we would never hear his voice again, within a day the countenance of his face changed. He was at peace, he was home, and we believe that he could sense that. We thank everyone around the world who has kept him and our family in their thoughts and prayers. We are at peace and at home too. Everyone had questions about what really happened to Otto. The medical examiner in Cincinnati was able to get some medical records from the North Koreans, and they said that the records showed that Otto had been in the same condition since April of 2016, shortly after his sentencing. So that would mean that for at least 14 months, Otto had been in this coma-like state after apparently suffering a severe neurological injury from an unknown cause. 14 months went by before North Korea disclosed his condition to his family and to US officials. His parents had been kept completely in the dark about their son's true condition for well over a year. They had no idea. But after the fact, North Korea officials were claiming that shortly after his sentencing in 2016, Otto had fallen ill and had fallen into a coma after taking a sleeping pill. US doctors stated that after some testing, they discovered Otto showed extensive loss of brain tissue in all regions of the brain, but they could not provide a specific cause as to why that would have happened. Daniel Cantor was the neurologist who was the lead physician for Otto when he returned back to the States, and he stated that Otto passed away because of severe brain damage resulting from being deprived of oxygen. In other words, he was not getting the amount of oxygen that he needed, causing very little blood flow to have access to his brain. He was able to tell that he had been deprived of oxygen for about 5 to 20 minutes, but the actual cause as to why he wasn't receiving the oxygen that he needed is unknown. His manner of death was listed as undetermined. Fred, Otto's father, strongly believes that Otto's death was no accident and that he lost his life as a result of the treatment that he endured at the hands of the North Korean officials. And a lot of people from the public agree with this. But to this day, there is no way for sure to say what really happened to Otto. In July of 2017, the US government banned American citizens from traveling to North Korea, with Otto's case cited as a major reason as to why. To this day, Otto's parents continue to speak publicly, advocate for human rights, and work to ensure Otto's death brings about meaningful change in how the world deals with North Korea, and they remain active trying to hold North Korea accountable through legal means for what happened to their son. And I want to end this video with a quote from Otto's friends describing him, quote, "A sports fan who can reel off stats about seemingly any team, a friendly Midwestern who can break down underground rap lyrics and craft some of his own, a deep thinker who would challenge himself and others to question their place in the world, a guy from an entrepreneurial family who ate half-price sushi, an insatiably curious person with a strong work ethic, and a delight in the ridiculous." This probably would be the case that makes me lose sleep. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of this case, and I want to know what your thoughts are on it, because literally, what do you mean? That is all I have for this video. Thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Otto's story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day and make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.